Yeah, welcome to the opening keynote session of WAN-IFRA's Indian Media Leaders East Summit. We will hear from Hong Kong about South China Morning Post's story of leading through the tough times and their transformation journey. Ms. Ritu Kapoor, CEO and co-founder of the Quint, will chair the session and get in conversation with Mr. Gary Liu, CEO of South China Morning Post. I'd like to briefly introduce both Gary as well as Ritu and then hand over the session to them. First about Ritu. Ritu is the CEO and co-founder of the Quint, and she's also the board member of World Editors Forum and Oxford University's Reuters Institute of Journalism. She used to head programming at History Channel and was features editor at CNN and IBN. Under Ritu's leadership, the Quint has grown by nearly 250% year on year in terms of both unique users and page views, and seen 100% growth in revenue and pulled in some of the biggest clients in the industry. Ritu has been recognized by Outlook Business as Woman of Worth 2017, the newsmaker. Welcome, Ritu, to the session.
Thank you. Thank you.
And about Gary, Gary is the CEO of South China Morning Post, a leading English language media company covering China and Asia. Prior to joining SCMP in January 2017, Gary was CEO of Dig, spearheading the New York startup's transformation from aggregator to a data-driven news platform. Previously, Gary was head of Spotify Labs, where he had led emerging technologies and business strategies for Spotify's global market after joining as global director of ad product strategy. Gary has also worked at AOL and Google. Born in the United States, Gary grew up in Taiwan and New Zealand before returning to America Northeast, where he lived and worked for 20 years. He currently lives in Hong Kong. Gary is an economics graduate from Harvard University. Warm welcome to our speakers, Mr. Gary Liu and Ritu Kapoor. Before I hand over the session to Ritu to take us through the session, I request attendees to post your questions in the live Q&A window you will see on your portal. And we can keep sending the questions during the sessions. Our speakers will answer the questions toward the end of the presentation. Also request the delegates to live tweet about the session and please use the hashtag IMLES. Thank you, and then I hand over the session to Ritu and Gary for the rest of the session.
Well, good morning, everyone. I hope everyone can hear me well. I am going to start off with just a very quick presentation to frame my conversation with Ritu. I think the most important thing is to get to that conversation, so I will do my best to fly through these slides as quickly as possible. I do want to thank WAN-IFRA India for inviting me. And this topic that we're discussing this morning as an opening session is so important: how to weather a global crisis like the one we're going through right now and build a sustainable business through all of it. The short answer that I'm going to provide today seems like a simple one, but it actually requires a heavy amount of deep thought by news organizations to define. And that easy answer, or that simple answer, is to rediscover new value for the old publications that all of us, I think many of us, work for. So I'm going to use the South China Morning Post transformation, which is, by the way, is in process. It is not complete. I'm going to use that process, that in-process transformation, to illustrate what I mean by just rediscovering new value in an old publication. And by the way, because we have not yet completed this transformation, there are bits and pieces of it that are still very much at risk, and I hope to be very honest with all of you about it. So let me start by reintroducing the South China Morning Post to those who may not be as familiar. It is a very old publication, certainly an old one in comparison to many of our peers here in this region of the world. We are coming up on 117 years. In just about a month and a half, we'll celebrate 117 years. English Language Daily in Hong Kong. Our front page from November 6, 1903, when we first started, was all ads. That's how old we are. And from the very beginning of our existence, the Hong Kong port was very, very important to us. This was our first printing plant right on the harbor, right on Victoria Harbor. And in fact, the first thing that we ever bought was a steam launch and not even a printing press. And the reason why the port was so important to us was because the paper was founded to tell the story of a changing southern China to the rest of the world via the trade ships that were moored and came in and out of Victoria Harbor. Now, as Hong Kong evolved, the Post then became the newspaper of record for the city, documenting the rise of this metropolis. Always has been, always, well, hopefully always will continue to be a global city. this merging of cultures, this creation of wealth, becoming one of the world's most important trade ports, and then one of its most important financial hubs, and now one of the most expensive real estate markets. In those 117 years, SCMP has covered the changing world around us, not only in southern China, but across the rest of Asia, including the overthrow of the Qing dynasty in 1911, the Japanese conquest of China and large parts of Asia, the Communist Revolution, the Cultural Revolution, Nixon's visit, and the reemergence of a bilateral relationship between the United States and China, and of course, Hong Kong's very own handover in 1997. Now, when I arrived at the Post, as Magdum said, in January of 2017, what I found was a very traditional news organization that was mostly resembled the process, the culture, the expectations of the old colonial newspaper that I had been for many, many years. But thankfully, the Post that I found had also already started shifting into digital. Now, where we're at that point was 4.3 million monthly active users. This was about 8 months since our old digital paywall was dropped in around April of 2016. So 8 months after that paywall came down, 4.3 million monthly active user. Hong Kong was our single largest marketplace. Surprisingly, however, we already had about 800,000 monthly users in the United States. We had 4 million monthly video views and about 400,000 monthly print readers, almost all exclusively in Hong Kong because we do not distribute print anywhere else in the world. But frankly speaking, this was at that moment in time a local newspaper that was reporting on the world for our Hong Kong readers. The problem was that we had nowhere else to grow. We had effectively fully penetrated the English language speaking world in Hong Kong. And for us to grow, we had to look outside of our home city. And my remit was to grow the Post for long-term sustainability. So how did we go about to do this? Well, as the title of this slide suggests, we found new value in our masthead. I'm going to repeat this term, new value, over and over and over again, because this is the way to build a sustainable business through crisis or otherwise for old traditional news organizations like ours. When I said that we found new value in our masthead, what I mean by that is we literally looked at our masthead, at our very name, and we realized that there was value in telling the story of China to the rest of the world, just like when we were founded in 1903. This is the lead, by the way, to the story of our transformation. Hong Kong, of course, is part of the most interesting place on earth. And I can show you these big numbers over and over again. I think all of you are very familiar with them. Every single chart points in the same direction. By the way, this is very much true of India as well. And this is what makes China so fascinating and so relevant to the entire world. This is a rising superpower whose impact and reach will touch every aspect of global life. So we believed that China's rise and how it changes everything about the world will be the most important story of our lifetimes. And because of that, any news organization that can dominate that story will have value to exchange with readers all around the world. And it just so happens that the South China Morning Post has been covering China from our very, very first publication in 1903, and we've always covered China in some shape or form. In fact, I would argue that our primary asset as a news organization is that we are in the city that allows us to be best positioned to cover China objectively and independently for the world. We have the proximity, but we also have the protection of freedom of press. We have the trust and the credibility. We have the history and the nuanced understanding of China. So in creating new value for SCMP, we focused on this, on building this new expertise of China for a world that really needs to understand it. And over the course of even in the last 15 years, ignore, by the way, the last year, in the last 15 years, there was SARS, there was the Asia financial crisis, there was their conflicts in the South China Sea, and of course, the implications of the Belt and Road Initiative, among dozens of other major global stories that initiate from China and that the world needs to understand. So the direction of our news organization became simple. From our base in Hong Kong, we are to report on China for the rest of the world. And this was a transformation that required 3 distinct pillars of change that all had to happen in parallel. And I'm going to go through each of those very, very quickly. Transformation number 1 was brand and identity. We had to transform what we represented and how we were seen around the world to translate our mission globally and on digital platforms. Now, the way we did that, we took a very, very convoluted, very confusing individual sort of a news brand, and we said, okay, let's root it in a symbol that can become iconic and that allows us to actually tell the story of the South China Morning Post past, present, and future. We landed on the International Maritime flag system because it mattered so much to the Hong Kong trade. And we ended up with this one flag that we honed in on, which was the flag for the letter K or kilo, which when it's raised by itself means I wish to communicate with you. That communicated our mission for the organization. It rooted ourselves in the past of the news organization as a trading newspaper for Southern China. And then when we actually turned it into our own flag, what we did was we actually changed the proportions of that flag into the proportions of our broadsheet, because that is going to be always going to be our legacy. And we made it 2 frames of a window because we believe that you have to understand multiple perspectives of any event to truly understand the truth. Now, why is this important? Because actually having this icon, this symbol, this logo that can actually tell the story of our present, our past, our present, and the future allows us to translate this mission wherever we are. And we actually also created a way so that it translates well on all digital platforms. This is not just for external, it is also meaningful for telling the story internally and getting cultural buy-in across the organization. The second part of our transformation was process and structure. This came really in 2 parts. We had to identify the priority for our news organization, and we had to identify where we put in the extra effort. The priority was actually relatively simple. We needed to be focused almost exclusively on digital production, and we had to have a collaborative newsroom so that that digital production could be seamless. And so we did a number of things with the structure of our actual news organization, the most important of which was that in September of 2017, we created a dedicated print team and separated it out from the rest of the newsroom. Instead of what a lot of news organizations do, which is create a dedicated digital team, we went the opposite. 350 people, 330 of them were just print. By default, we are a digital newsroom. 330 people were just digital. By default, we are a digital newsroom. Only 20 people in our entire newsroom are allowed to touch print, have the accountability and the responsibility of putting together the print newspaper. This was defining our priority. And then finally, effort. The deep understanding of our audience and the output of our news was the primary thing we're going to invest in. So we invested first and foremost in our data infrastructure. Before anything else, we rebuilt our entire data stack so that we could get to real-time proprietary data, which actually informs a huge amount of our editorial decision-making at this point, also informs everything we do on product and technology, which is our third transformation. For product and technology, the key thing was that we had to become a product company. Going from a news to a product company, the main thing we had to change was that we had to become user first and platform agnostic. Everything we built is thinking about how user behavior should translate into the news world. We meet our user where they are, doesn't matter where they want to discover content. It could be on mobile web, it could be a native app, it could be across any number of distribution channels, which is why we dedicated ourselves to the distributed media channel, the distributed media model, I should say. Our investment was across all of these things. Effectively, the same story can be repackaged for any channel that our users around the world could be discovering content on. All 3 of these transformations, brand, process and structure, product and technology, all happened in parallel, and we're very, very lucky that just as we were finishing the first phase of all 3 of these transformations, we hit the last 15 months. We hit the US-China trade war, the civil unrest, and 7 months of protests in Hong Kong, Tiananmen's 30th anniversary and all the implications of that. Of course, COVID-19. The US election and the fact that the China issue is now a primary issue for arguably the most important presidential election in American history, and the national security law here in Hong Kong. Not to mention a dozen other stories in between. All of these things happened in the last 15 months, which to us was confirmation and affirmation that with China's rise, everything that happens in and around China is going to impact the rest of the world, that the rest of the world must understand China to understand the future. And thankfully, the SCMP of the past was gone, and the SCMP of the future is here. Now, what that meant for us was this beautiful chart that we all want to see, which is massive growth over the course of the last 12 months, or actually more than that, the last really 18 months now, in audience and reach. By the way, this is not just about COVID-19. It was steady growth for several years, and then we pushed up as US-China tensions rose, and everything that China did impacted the world as that became more and more important. So where we landed was this. From 4 million to 51 million monthly active users, 12x growth in MAU. All of it, almost all of it, was internationally. 800,000 US readers to nearly 20 million monthly US readers. 62 times growth in video. And what we really became and what we are now is a global media company reporting on China for the world. We haven't quite lit up the entire world yet, but we're well on our way. However, even with that increase in reach and impact, here's what happened last year, going into this year. And this is exactly what many of our peers, including many people on this call, will have seen. The traditional revenue sources, even some of our new revenue sources like digital advertising, all fell through a floor. What we recognize is that we are overexposed to just advertising. We have to diversify, we have to build more and multiple revenue channels to sustain our business long term. The way that we're doing it is relatively simple. Our confidence comes from the fact that we know that as a product company, we can take the next step and become a platform company. And what I mean by that is that we can become a platform of multiple different products that allows access into a very restricted China. And in fact, a China that is likely going to become even more restricted over the next several years. What that means is that if we build up these multiple platforms and multiple channels of access, we become a platform. And our exchange of value is that we can give you access to a closed information system, which has led us to very confidently launch our digital subscription product just a month ago on August 10th for Asia, and it's going to expand to the rest of the world in the next month or so. This value exchange, we believe, is abundantly clear. It is very, very unique, and it is highly defensible. We're giving you access to a closed information system that you otherwise would not have access to. Of course, what that means is not an easy path forward. Over the course of the next 12 months, we're actually going to have an even more difficult time. COVID impact is not going to go away. US-China tensions are going to continue to rise, but our position is clear and that foundation is strong. So we are very confident in articulating our value to our readers worldwide, which is that our journalism is journalism that our readers deserve. We have an ad campaign. I'm not going to share with you. We will send the video out to WAN-IFRA if people are interested. But I'm going to end here, and I'm going to shoot over to Ritu and see if there are any questions that she would like me to answer or other people want to answer about what it looks like to work through crisis and eventually to build a sustainable business. So let me go ahead and stop my screen share and jump back into conversation.
Thanks so much for that, Gary. Looks like a really accelerated, fascinating 15-month journey, and it seems to have been pretty smooth. Now, tell me honestly, where were the biggest bumps? Was it tech? Was it getting a legacy editorial team to start switching to data-centric decision-making or to try and be much closer to the audience? Where were the real challenges?
Yeah, it's a great question to start with. There were several, and I will identify two main ones. The first was cultural. The first is what you mentioned, is getting a traditional news organization. By the way, it's not just the newsroom, right? Because as a news organization, there are many traditional aspects of the way that we operate. On the revenue side, on the distribution side, on the business strategy and business development side, all of these areas and the newsroom and how we do journalism needed a change, needed to understand that our users are now in different places, they have different expectations, and therefore the way that we run and the way that we operate has to be different. That cultural transformation, that transformation of basic learning and default understanding, all of those things take time. They take a lot of effort on communication. They take a lot of reiteration from management. They take a lot of commitment through conviction. And those things are nowhere near done. We're now about 4 years in, and I still constantly, every month at Town Hall, have to remind our organization why we do what we do and how our change is going to serve our readers better. So that's number one, it's a cultural change. The second biggest road bump is the fact that because of the digital world, the user behavior and user expectations are now changing at a much faster cycle than they used to. And that cycle of change now is about every 6 months. It used to be every 10, 15, 20 years, users' expectations and behavior change. So now, even when we finally feel like we've caught up, and we're taking, we're like kind of saying, okay, finally we caught up, everything has changed again, and we have to look for the next thing, try the next thing. So those are the two biggest road bumps among many that we will probably always have to contend with.
So it's a question that I'd like to follow up with. How important do you think is tech, and how, you talked about how you split up the teams between the print team and the digital team. How large or how significant is your tech and product team? Because as a digital only organization, for me, I find that it's a lot about tech.
Yeah.
So, and what parts of tech are you focusing on?
I 100% agree with you. I believe tech is fundamental, but it's not just for the sake of having tech. Technology does a couple of things. The first thing is that it actually makes your newsroom faster and more accurate and more productive. We have so many tools available to us now, and if we don't use them and our competitors using them, it means that those newsrooms are going to be better than ours. So that's why we need technology, internal technology for newsrooms. The second important thing about tech is it allows us to actually package and distribute our content everywhere, right? We cannot just have a website anymore. We have to have a website that can translate in progressive web as well as a native app, and we also have to have a CMS and effectively our content has to be translatable across all forms of social media. If they're not in those distribution channels, then we are in many places in the world, including across India, irrelevant. We are non-existent. We're not on those networks. So we need technology to be able to package and distribute our content. And then finally, technology, and specifically data, allows us to understand our business and understand our users. Without that, we will never truly be a company that actually builds for our user first. And if we don't do that, then we will also become irrelevant compared to the rest of the world. So that's why I think technology investment is very, very critical.
Okay, moving to revenue, the fight for the ad dollar is now so much tougher in the digital space because, for the past 5 years, a product like the Quint, we were innovating on ad revenue because we're not behind a paywall. One of our partner content, which is Bloomberg Quint, that is behind a paywall, but we are not. And now with all of legacy print, with its 100-year-old brand loyalties coming into the digital ad revenue battle, and we saw your graph, we saw how it's collapsing. And let's if I could also say that news is public good, and it is a resource intensive. Quality journalism needs quality funding. And we're also seeing how this entire distributed content, we're seeing what's happening when you're just completely ad revenue driven, what that does to security, privacy, and several other things. What really, honestly, is the future for revenue towards quality journalism, which is expensive?
The answer, I think, is multiple revenue channels. It cannot sustain on just advertising, whether it is digital or print. It cannot sustain on just subscription for most scale news organizations. It cannot sustain on just events. It cannot sustain on just, a B2B business. It requires all of those things in aggregate, in totality, to be able to sustain a high quality newsroom. And so my job as CEO of the Post is to experiment, develop, and scale multiple revenue channels so that all of those revenue streams together will bring in enough money and enough margin to operate this company long term. And operating this company long term as a profitable news company is really, frankly, I think the only way that any of us as newsmakers will be able to protect the long-term independence of journalism. And so I do really encourage every news executive to think about what multiple channels are. And this goes back to my major point in that presentation. If you do not have a very, very clear new value to users, you will never be able to figure out what all of those multiple revenue channels are going to be. If you are a commodity value, which means I just have audience that everyone else has, I can only rely on very increasingly low CPMs for advertising. Unless I'm unique, I can't ask users to pay for me. I can't really develop any kind of events business. I can't develop a B2B corporate business. A lot of the additional revenue channels will not be available to us. So identifying that unique value is of utmost importance.
What is the unique, if SCMP were to be behind a subscription wall, what for me as a user is the unique value that SCMP has? Why would I if I'm choosing one product in that area in APAC, why would I choose SCMP? And has that value come much more from the 330 digital team, or is it coming from some of the deeper, older, more experienced journalism? Where is this new value for SCMP coming from?
The value for SCMP, dead simple. To understand the world in 2020 and beyond, you must understand China. I don't think that is it's a controversial statement anymore. And China is a closed information system. It's actually very, very difficult to understand China in all its complexity and nuance. And the South China Morning Post is the one news organization that will help you understand China in all of its comprehensiveness and all of its nuance. That's the value. And that value, Ritu, is coming from our entire newsroom. And I want to be clear. There is no journalist, there is no reporter that is writing for print anymore. That doesn't exist in our newsroom. The entire newsroom is writing for our digital product. And then there's a small team that takes what is on digital and packages it as a print product every single morning. So there is no more tenured, more experienced investigative journalist that is writing for print. The entire newsroom, whether they're writing 300-word articles or they're writing multiple 1,000-word deep dive investigative pieces, they're all writing for the digital product.
And I think that's a mantra that a lot of legacy organizations should look for. And congratulations to you for having pulled that off at SCMP. In India, we're dealing with a lot of issues of press freedom, press crawling, of course, and press financial crumbling. Is SCMP at any point dealing with or up against any of those challenges?
Yeah, many of the same ones. Obviously, the financial structure that's sponsored and supported journalism around the world for so many decades has completely collapsed. And so much of our struggle is trying to figure out what that new economic model is to keep ourselves sustainable through profitability and therefore being able to protect the independence of the news organization and have that in our own hands. On top of that, it doesn't matter where you are in the world, Ritu, and doesn't matter what's going on in local governance, the protection of press freedoms always has to be a proactive effort, right? You can be in the most liberal, progressive Western democracy if news organizations and news executives are not constantly, actively protecting press freedoms and advocating for press freedoms and making sure that in our own newsrooms, there's no sound censorship, there is no, that there is objectivity, that there is balance, there is a sacrosanct adherence to the discovery and distribution of truth. If we're not proactive about it, then we're naturally going to be sliding backwards on it. So I don't think that is a unique issue for India. I do think that in certain governments in certain places around the world, including in Hong Kong, there are more active threats to press freedoms because of the local political civil situation. But anywhere in the world, if a news executive is not proactively fighting for breastfeedings and advocating for them, then they should reconsider that they really should change up their behavior.
But it's getting tougher for, you know, journalists are now are being slapped with all sorts of charges from terrorism. Journalists are behind bars. We know of the you know, globally the number of deaths that journalists are dealing with. So it's getting tougher and nastier. And I can see that, you know, we need to move to the questions, but I have one quick question only because it's, I have to ask it. If you had Alibaba's magic lamp, what's the one thing you'd ask News Genie? What is the one thing that you don't have?
It's funny you say Alibaba, because obviously Alibaba, the company, is the owner of the South China Morning Post. We don't have a magic lamp. If I could ask for, I would ask for media education around the world. I would ask for the next generation of consumers to be raised in school to understand the value of truth, to be able to identify objective journalism versus everything else that is out there on the internet. Because I believe if they understand the value, then we as a news organization will absolutely be able to survive. I think journalism will enter into a new golden age, and that is what I would rub the lamp and hope for.
I couldn't agree more. In this era of disinformation, misinformation, malinformation, media literacy among audiences is really, really important. We're going to move to some of the questions that have come in from our audiences. Shomitro Dasgupta's question is, when you used a maritime flag as the SCMP's logo, did you have to acquire a patent? Was that a challenge? Was that a challenge in using what is a university accepted symbol?
Before that, Gary, let this be the last question, and then we have only 2 more minutes for the session.
Okay.
This is very simple. No, I mean, it is a universal symbol, and we of course made it ours. So now we own the trademark to our very specific flag.
So Maktub, do we have time for one more question?
Yeah, maybe quickly. Yeah, sure.
A question from Pradeep Gairola, The Hindu. In 2017, when you transformed from the newsroom and earmarked only 20 to bring next day newspaper, what percentage of revenue was coming from the newspaper?
Almost all of it. And we are still in that position where the vast majority of our revenue is coming from news, and still a big portion of it is coming from the print newspaper, and that is what we need to diversify.
Okay. Thanks so much, Gary. It's been wonderful speaking with you. Makhdoom, thanks. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Gary, Liu, and Ritu, and for the lively conversation, and was a great lesson from SCMP. I think it was a fantastic start to the Indian Media Leaders E-Summit, and thank you for coming all the way from Delhi and from Hong Kong. With this, we conclude the opening keynote session. I request all the attendees to go back on a timeline and click on the next session to listen to the CEOs of Indian media companies and on how they tackle post-COVID business challenges. And this session will start approximately on another 1 minute. So we end the session here. Thank you again, both Gary and Ritu, and we'll see you again sometime in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.